Vaga luna che in argenti queste rive, questi fiori, et inspiri agli elementi il linguaggio dell'amor. Testimonior sei tu sola del mio fervido desir, ed a lei che mi innamora, conta i palpiti e i sospir, ed a lei che mi innamora, conta i palpiti e i sospir, ed a lei che mi innamora, conta i palpiti e i sospir, e i sospir, e i sospir.
It all began in Brussels Film Library, Cinémathèque Royale, when Jacques Ledoux, the flamboyant conservator, received a package of brand new prints from Moscow. In it, classics like Eisenstein, connoisseur's choice like Barnett, and one totally unknown, Счастье, Happiness, by Alexandr Medvedkin. Ledoux hadn't ordered it, he didn't even know the man's name. Apparently, one hidden hand had thrown that bottle to the sea of Cinémathèque. There was the mystery of the date, 1934, and yet a silent picture. Plus the fact that film and filmmaker were completely forgotten by the historians of Soviet cinema. Only in J. Leida's monumental Kino, History of Russian Film, mentioned an incredible experiment in the 30s, a kinopoist, a film train carrying cameras, lab, editing tables, screening material and even actors to produce the first real movies, films made on the spot in collaboration with the local people, workers in factories, peasants in kolkhozes, shot in one day, processed during the night, edited the following day and screened in front of the very people who had participated to its making. Contrarily to the agitprop trains which carried official propaganda from the studios to the people, here the people were his own studio. And at the very moment bureaucracy was spreading all over, a film unit could go and produce uncensored material around the country. And it lasted 1 year, 1932, Curtain. Pre-written titles to intercut in their on-the-spot inquiries, and that the most widely used was "Comrades, this cannot last." This is how Chris Marker, French film director, wrote in appendix of his film Le Temps qui marche, The Trail Rolls On, about the discovery of the phosphorescent moving universe of New Judgment on Reality of Alexandr Medvedkin. Marker dedicated 2 films on this lost in history discovery. The second one is Last Bolshevik, The Alexander's Grave, but the most reverberated heritage of Medvedkin on a new life and new cinematic justice are a group Medvedkin, an exemplary chapter of so-called militant cinema written and filmed there, in eastern France, in the heart of the factories. The activity of the Medvedkin groups constitutes an audiovisual social experiment led by directors and technicians of militant cinema in association with workers from the Besançon and Suzhou regions between 1967 and 1974, in which participated, among the others, film directors Jean-Luc Godard and Joris Ivans.
I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. I think the combination of age and a greater coming together is responsible for the speed of the passing time. life have passed so quickly. I think
medicine, music, and law. Three disciplines which seem to lie at the antipode of one another. On the surface, it appears they share little in common. Can music become law? Can medicine become law? Can law become medicine? Could we try to relate them to each other using aesthetics? Could we assert that medical workers, lawyers, and musicians can be fueled by a desire of making the world a more just place, a more beautiful place? Let's try to find a little thing in common. In the beginning, you could hear a piece for speaking pianists called Coming Together Attica. It is a piece composed by Frederic Rzewski in 1972 as a reaction to the Attica prison massacre. The text accompanying the music comes from a letter sent from prison by Samuel Melville, a left-wing activist, to his brother. Sam Melville played an important role in the uprising that took place in Attica Correctional Facility in 1971. The riot was motivated by the will of inmates to have more just conditions. The Attica Liberation Faction Manifesto of Demands is a compilation of complaints written by the Attica prisoners and includes 27 demands such as better medical treatment, fair visitation right, and an end to physical brutality. It also includes demands to immediately stop segregation of black and brown people, for inmates to be able to form unions, for prisoners not to be exploited and forced to work for an average of 40 cents a day, and for equal legal representation accessible to all. After 4 days of intense negotiations, however, the prison was retaken by force, ending up in a violent shooting that killed 43 people, among which 33 were inmates. Of the 43 deaths, only one is attributed to an inmate. Samuel Melville was among the victims shot by the officers. This incident shocked many people, and among others, composer Rzewski. As he said, "I thought I had to do something about it. It was a shocking event that shocked many Americans. One couldn't just write something surreal with an abstract title, for example, aphorism number 2. That time was over. Music should be more relevant to social events." As a result of the riot, the New York State Department of Corrections began to make active changes to the legal framework correction facilities needed to obey. Many of the demands of the rioters are today considered the norm, and any disrespect of them can result in severe sanctions. Another person motivated by a clear vision of a more just world, the Canadian Dr. Norman Bethune, played an incredible role in the socializing of medical practice. Being in the first line of battle against the fascists during the Spanish Civil War, he invented the first ever mobile blood transfusion unit that saved the lives of thousands of men. The only foreigner to be titled national hero in the People's Republic of China, he was the source of profound change that forever impacted the healthcare system in China. Called by many doctors of the poor, he was very famous for offering his services free of charge to the disadvantaged, and was one of the first to draw direct attention to socioeconomic disparity as a cause of the high rate of infectious diseases and mortality. Bethune always felt that if poverty could be eliminated, tuberculosis would disappear. There is a rich man's tuberculosis and a poor man's tuberculosis. The rich man recovers and the poor man dies, would he write in a journal quoting a friend. A man extremely critical towards his colleagues, he called upon a complete renewal of the medical profession, describing his fellows as smug and satisfied like tailors. The workers didn't have any health care on top of the existing lack of security norms of their working environment. Very few individuals, however, wanted to have any kind of involvement in the social reforms, trying to eradicate what was believed to be one of the negative impacts of capitalism. Among those few, however, was Norman Bethune. Being deeply impressed with the socialized Soviet medical system, and particularly its success in controlling tuberculosis, he began a crusade to reform the Canadian healthcare system. He founded the Montreal Social Medicine Group and forwarded a manifesto in support of socialized medicine. But he was greeted with complete public indifference. It was even publicly criticized by some, calling it too extreme. Interestingly, most of Bethune's extreme suggestions became effective in Canada in 1970, more than 35 years later, and are considered a legal norm in any country with a developed healthcare system. I deliberately said any country with a developed healthcare system and not developed countries because, as you know, the United States of America is one of the most developed countries, yet still has no healthcare system. It is interesting now to go back to our first question. how to find the intersections between aesthetics, medicine, and law, the practice of equality as a customer right for all, and using the method of equality between different materials constructing our world toward a better place for all, sounds, images, movements, as well as health, housing conditions, and system of justice and laws, has the tactics of fiction as the little thing in common. The tactics of fiction designates the art of fictionalizing the real in order to think about it within this same reality. The tactics of fiction does not mean a fantasy, invention, a creation of a parallel world, or the representation of a reality through the pretense or the decoy, but rather an intelligible construction with and within an already given world. Jacques Rancière, in his book Partage du sensible, esthétique et politique, raises that today the aesthetic revolution upsets things. The testimony and fiction come from the same system of meaning. We could agree on what he adds. The real must be fictionalized to be taught. The legal outcome resulting from a struggle for a new fiction becomes as important as the real and as the struggle itself.
Exercise! Talk to God, to inmates! Feeling for inevitable direction of my life!
10 years earlier, Dziga Vertov, the film director of communism of second type, producer of universe of sensorial experiences of the communist egalitarian movement mirror images which had to reflect the world on the turn and move, spent about 2 years after the Soviet Revolution in Agit train, together with the poet Mayakovsky and many other artists, on the rails who were to bring to the people the art of new justice and new laws. And a few years before that, in April 1917, Lenin returned after 17 years of exile to Russia with the armored train, while he accepted the assistance of Germany to travel more than 2,000 miles over 8 days in a sealed railway car through Germany, Sweden and Finland before finally reaching Petrograd's Finlandia station in April. If the Soviet Revolution is, next to the Paris Commune, the first organized attempt to establish new coordinates of justice and law that would apply equally in establishing a new fairer life for all, the years surrounding the Soviet Revolution were also the years in which the greatest effort was made to reconfigure the role of arts and artists in such a new and egalitarian life for all. As the every law premises starts from the fictional position, if it was, intending to arrive on the place of legal norms saying, making final judgment, is like that. The artist had maybe legitimate role of acting in the premises of legislative set of words. This is how in 1919, two Dadaist artists, Richard Huelsenbeck and Raoul Hausmann, wrote What is Dadaism and what does it want in Germany, making fiction of Dadaism justice and demands as those ones. First, the International Revolutionary Union of all creative and intellectual men and women on the basis of radical communism. Second, the introduction of progressive unemployment through comprehensive mechanization of every field of activity. Only by unemployment does it become possible for the individual to achieve certainty as to the truth of life and finally become accustomed to experience. And third, the immediate expropriation of property, socialization, and the communal feeding of all. Further, the erection of cities of light and gardens which will belong to society as a whole and prepare man for a state of freedom. 2. The Central Council demands daily meals at public expense for all creative and intellectual men and women on the Potsdamer Platz, Berlin. Compulsory adherence of all clergymen and teachers to the Dadaist articles of faith. Introduction of the simultaneous poem as a communist state prayer. Requisition of churches for the performance of Bruitism, simultaneous and Dadaist poems. Establishment of a Dadaist advisory council for the remodeling of life in every city of over 50,000 inhabitants. Submission of all laws and decrees to the Dadaist Central Council for approval. And a few years before Lenin arrived at St. Petersburg's Finlandia station, Leon Nikolaevich Tolstoy, a great writer whom Lenin loved and read, a nobleman and possible model for Medvedkin's Peasant from Happiness. Tolstoy, who taught and wrote in the spirit of Joseph Jacoton the text, "Who should learn writing of whom? Peasant children of us, or we of peasant children?" And before War and Peace, wrote a pedagogical manual, the only pedagogical criterion freedom, for the first school for Russian peasants' children. He set out on his last journey without a destination on the train, and died in 1910 at the train station of the small town of Astapov, without possibility that the Orthodox priest accompanying him on this last trip been previously excommunicated from the church. Tolstoy was convinced that children learn best through stories, through literature, through the free expression searching forms in small mirrors of words, and capturing the light of life's feelings, grinding the world a better place for all. Even much before that, claiming that workers do not have homelands and that we don't claim from them what they don't have, Karl Marx, a stateless person, passed the miles in exile traveling in a train. He admired Auguste Blanky, thinker and revolutionary who spent 37 years of his life in prison, immobile but making many interior journeys through his prison writings. Moving by train to Brussels in exile, he wrote during his preventive incarceration during the Commune of Paris, 1871, his last book, the amateur manual of astronomy named Eternity by Stars, not being physically even in the position to see a single star. More than 100 years later, Jacques Rancière wrote a preface for Blanky's book, where the author, after many other Blanky's books, calling for taking the arms, claimed that the mirrored situation of constellations and stars reflecting on Earth knows the bifurcation as the only possible path to take in searching permanent reconfiguration of existing order and endless emancipation and equality practice and paths. In all this journey in the third wagon of Paratax's train, Dada's law Rancière, what are the common horizons which we could share all? The wagons made of images and words dealing with different temporalities and places propose a dramaturgy of reencountment of the world and equality through the new hypothesis of normativity. Who is the subject of law and who is the subject of illegality? How to imagine a new journey with Rosa Parks of our times?